Hello and welcome to the aForm Show, the premier podcast for all things architecture and design across the MENA region. Welcome to your tribe. Today's episode is supported by SkyStruct, the groundbreaking construction and project management solution that's absolutely turning heads in the industry. They are bringing together architects, engineers, project managers, procurement, and essentially any stakeholder onto one singular platform. Yes, clients are included. SkyStruct is genuinely changing the game. Its tailored modules for construction management, inventory, labor, cost management help streamline the chaos of construction projects. They are rolling out very soon in Dubai, but you as the listener can get in early. Drop us an email at hello@aForm.studio and find out how SkyStruct is the future, and it is here today. Now, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the show, everyone. This week we are joined by Yahya Jan, President and Design Director at Norr Group. Needless to say, Yahya has contributed to the skyline of Dubai across multiple decades. He has quite literally seen the city of Dubai and the region evolve over time. Undoubtedly, this has gained him invaluable insight into our beloved industry. We look forward to unpacking a lot today. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Yahya. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Alan. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. It is very intimidating to research a profile like yourself because there is so much depth and width to the amount of work that you've done. And before I even went into all that, I kind of noticed you've been with Norr a long time. I mean, the best example I could think of that is that in a world of sort of, nowadays, marriages are kind of 90 days, 60 days, fit outs are 60 days, things like that. What really is the secret almost to, 3 decades, so to speak, with Norr? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I hope not too many marriages are 90 days, because certainly we get into them believing in it. Look, what is a company? So a company is a place where people come together,
right?
People who are like-minded and who have a shared vision. And if the values of the company and of the group align with your personal values, then it's the right place to be. And that was the case for my experience with Norr. I've been with Norr 28 years.
Right. And
I know that sounds like a lifetime, and it almost is.
I think most of our listeners have probably not even been alive for that long.
28 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. But when I joined Norr in 1996, I was working in the US prior to that, and I didn't think I would be with the same company for 28 years. I mean, you don't imagine, you don't look that far ahead, right? You just do what feels right at the moment.
Correct.
And joining the company, I realized that, wow, it's a pretty exciting place. It was very small. It was only 30 people. So the group has obviously evolved and grown while I've been here.
Right.
But for me, it was the values, the kinds of projects, very exciting work, the design, and I would say leadership ethos of the company,
right?
Which is it's a meritocracy. It's really based on who you are and what you're doing. We are extremely hardworking, but also casual at the same time.
Yeah,
I like that also.
Yeah, I think anyone who's been to the Norr studio here down Festival City. I mean, I can't think of the last time I've seen a dedicated model making space in an architectural studio, to be honest. So I mean, that in itself is quite telling. So yeah, that I completely agree.
Yeah. I mean, we are a studio-based design firm. But of course, as you know, we are engineers and architects, right? So we have more engineers, structural and mechanical, electrical engineers is a larger count than our architecture count, or almost equal. We're about 120 people overall.
Right.
So we are an art firm and a tech firm, architecture and engineering, art and science coming together. And I love that. I mean, I love that left brain, right brain combination.
Yeah, that's a very sweet spot to be in almost. If I kind of visually just Venn diagram that, art, tech, engineering, architecture, that's a very, very good center to be in, I think.
I personally believe that building construction was never just architecture or just engineering. If you go back and look at the history of buildings, there was no distinction. The architect was also the engineer. And what we used to call master masons, right? Or mimars.
Right.
So there is an over specialization in our industry, which is which is valid because our buildings are much more complex. So we've created many disciplines and we have specialists for everything now.
Right.
And while I love that, I also believe you need to bring everyone together and find that sweet spot, as you were saying, find the sweet spot also in design and unlock potential.
Right.
And in our case, our architects and engineers all sit together. They're all mixed up. There's no, the left side of the office is engineering or the right side is architecture. No, you walk around, everyone's sitting together. So we're team-based.
Yeah, I mean, that was literally going to be sort of my next question. I feel like you almost read my mind because one of the, failure is too strong a word, but one of the side effects, I suppose, of becoming a large multidisciplinary firm is that you tend to then have departments. You have the structural department and the MEP department, the architecture department, and invariably, just by geographical proximity, communication sort of drops and people tend to become quite siloed, so to speak. So I think the setup that you were just describing, sort of having this team-based, members coming around a project rather than everyone kind of working in their own little, bubble, so to speak, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Would you attribute that to a lot of the success, I would imagine, that Norr has had?
We should always recognize that different professionals come with different skill sets and backgrounds. And there is always going to be some silo effect that you talked about because people are so focused on their craft. Whether if you're an electrical engineer, you're really focused on that, right?
Right.
So the trick is that the people in the different groups, the subgroups and their leaders actually appreciate the holistic aspect of design.
Right.
And are people oriented and social. So we have a billiard table here and you saw there's a punching bag hanging in our cafe. We've got a cafe, which is the center of our studio, other than the 3D lab. So for us, we've said our whole company is designed for collaboration. You can write on the walls. The walls have all this paint where you can write and clean it off. Steel plates behind that paint, so we can do pinups. We do lots of pinups, a lot of collaboration.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that our leaders and our people believe in that. We find it's very efficient to do pinups and to collaborate and solve problems together.
Understood.
So, but it's always an issue. It's always something that you really have to work at it because there is always a kind of a default setting where people, even like myself, we tend to recede into our own world, what we are doing, the craft that we're really good at, and we can miss out on the fact that we need to find the overlap and make sure that's happening.
Right. Very true. Very true. Now that I think of it, I think that happens with me quite a bit too. Kind of receding into your own little cocoon, with the headphones on and the music. And so, yeah, that's absolutely right.
Look, it's called deep work. And I'm actually a big believer in that. I believe in focused deep work without distraction, because I think that's when you can go so deep into it, time stops. When I look up, oh my God, 3 hours have gone, right?
Yeah,
and you're sketching something. Or in the case of a structural engineer, they might be working on a ETAB model for a tower. And that deep work is very important, actually. So we shouldn't deny that. But we should also recognize the need for coming out of deep and collaborating and then go back in.
True. I think what you were describing, I was reading a book the other day and the name eludes me now, but I think flow, a state of flow is what I think we all aspire to, attain, number one. But I think it's interesting the way you put it, to be able to enter and then come back, which to me, if I must be entirely honest, is quite difficult to do, just because it becomes so engrossing to, kind of really go sketch after sketch after sketch and really sort of, drill down deep to a possible solution. And that for me is quite exciting. So I'm kind of wondering, were there any processes or workflows you kind of baked into your, workflow, so to speak, where you're like, all right, I kind of know that I have to break this off now. Is there any kind of thought of that nature?
Look, we live in a distracted world, right?
100%.
I've got 2 daughters and everyone's on Instagram and so am I, right? So I think what's happening in our lives, especially with social media and the speed of media, right? And the need to constantly communicate, perhaps in a, soundbite stuff that's happening.
Right.
That's a reality, right? So the question is, how do you discipline yourself? So you don't. So for instance, I read a lot of books every year. I listen to music. I like to go into the flow. I love it. And I can sometimes go into, say, sketch mode or reading mode if I'm reading a book, and 4 hours later, I look up. But I only did that for 4 hours. And my mobile is always off. My ringer is never on. And no vibrate either.
Right.
So, and you'll notice in our office, you will not hear the phone ringing in this office. All the ringers.
That is very true.
All the ringers are off. Even the regular telephones that are sitting on our desk, the ringers are off.
Right.
Or it'll be so silent that only the person right next to it can hear it.
Gotcha.
So we've designed a studio almost like a library where, yes, you can hear the coffee machine go off and you'll hear a few conversations, and that's good. But it's not loud. It's a quiet place.
Right.
By and large.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I think focus is the key.
No, I completely agree. I never really noticed it until you just pointed it out. It is a very comfortable silent, I must say. It's not a eerie silent, but it's a very comfortable silent, which is awesome.
Look, we're doorless, right? I mean, you're in my office. There is no door, right?
Yeah.
The only door we have in our entire studio, one is for the main meeting room, because we have video calls there.
Yeah.
And the other door is the door to the 3D lab because of the construction of the models that we are making. Otherwise, it's free flow, right? And for me, that's really important.
Interesting. I think you briefly touched upon, I would get the impression that you are quite a voracious reader, probably. And I'm assuming a lot of that might have to do with design or other interests. Anything that you're reading at the moment you think our listeners would find quite interesting?
My problem is that I read a book and then 3 years later, I read it again.
Okay.
And I know it sounds really boring.
No, why not?
Yeah, I love it because I actually love reading. And the other issue I have is that I can be reading 3 or 4 books at the same time. And they'll all be next to my bedside or even in the studio. So I'm a history buff.
Okay.
So a lot of what I read is biographies and historical books.
Gotcha.
And I'm very focused on 20th century history. From the beginning of the 20th century.
Why so? Why that particular junction?
I'm not sure why. So I was very interested earlier in how industrialized society changed during the late industrial age, 20th century, especially the major conflicts that happened and the transition of our societies from agrarian to rural to urban societies. So my interests are very much in politics, history. So the biographies I'm reading, I read a lot of what have I read recently? So obviously I read Obama's biography, Promised Land, and then the earlier one that he wrote. I've read all of Kissinger's books, which are, 1,000 pages each. White House Years and Conflict. I've read recently, what else have I read? I do read some books which are non-historical. I rarely read fiction. So the non-historical books would be more on, say, management strategy or design thinking, things of that sort. I find quite exciting. I love documentaries.
Okay.
So it sounds a bit boring, but that's the kind of stuff I love to read.
You'd be surprised the number of designers who I talk to who are like, documentary is way to go. It's I wonder what the connection is. There must be something that kind of triggers the interest, I would imagine.
I think my guess is that those who become architects and engineers, for instance, tend to be a bit bookish, and that word where you tend to research stuff, you tend to go into topics.
Yeah.
We love that. I think that's perhaps why we went into this profession.
True.
Because it's a profession of detail and detailed thinking.
True.
And that you can translate that interest into other disciplines, whatever your interest might be other than pure design.
Gotcha. Makes sense. I kind of then want to pivot a little bit, if we could, towards when we started the episode, we mentioned that, obviously you have a long-standing history within this particular market. And I'm curious to get, I know we spoke about it briefly off air, but I'm curious to get what your opinion is or what your stance is on the current sort of design ecosystem that we have in, well, the city, but region at large even. Anything that you think is going quite well or something that you've, kind of has piqued your interest, so to speak, or even if it's negative for that matter, that's also fine. But what are your thoughts?
Look, I have very strong opinions on models for urbanism. And I do present papers on that, and we do some research on that. So whether it's Dubai or the Middle East in general, or Asia and Africa, which are the main areas where we're seeing tremendous urban change, right? So now you are seeing the birth of cities, which are what we call mega cities, 20 million, 30 million people. Dubai is very small compared to mega cities, right? But these cities are like radical transformation of how human beings live, right? And a lot of it has to do with mass migration and fertility rates and population growth. The question in my mind is that how well are we doing and how imaginative are we in planning our cities? Right. So that goes beyond designing an individual building. You can say this building is great and that building is not great. But what about buildings in the aggregate when they all come together? How well does it work? And one of my pet projects for research is density. I've written a paper on that and presented in Singapore a couple of months ago, which is looking at cities and looking at how dense are they? Because dense cities, if they are designed well, and that's the $1 million question. Dense city that's designed well is way more sustainable and energy efficient and resource efficient than a sprawled city. So the paradigm is density versus dispersion. So I'm a big advocate for density. But density doesn't need to be towers. You can have a dense city which is low-rise and mid-rise. It just depends on how you design it. Density is people per hectare. Right. So even when I look at cities like Dubai and other cities in the region, there are areas of extreme density which are very successful. So the Burj Khalifa downtown area, for instance, and the Marina area, and now Creek Harbor. And these cities exhibit interesting kind of reality, which is they're polycentric. They have multiple centers, not one center. And the centers tend to be where the density is, but then the rest of it is horizontal dispersion, suburbia. And what I would say to planners and to people in policy making is to emphasize density over dispersion. So try and create cities which have critical mass, but then it has to be designed very well. Very well, like Hong Kong or parts of Singapore, New York. You have to design it very well. You have to put urban spaces and shared facilities, and it has to work like a machine, right?
Yeah, and I would think infrastructure plays a big part in that as well, because I think Dubai probably has been a bit guilty of it in the past where, infrastructure was kind of always planned for a certain amount of density probably, and then very quickly we reach that density and then it becomes a bit of a problem for everyone. So yeah, I think you're right. That was actually going to be one of the things that I want to talk about, which is obviously, needless to say, Norr has done quite a lot of skyscrapers, quite a lot of super tall buildings even, I would say. And I've always wanted to ask you, I understand in a place like Manhattan or Hong Kong, for example, where there is a land scarcity and there is, for example, like downtown New York, for example, you have foundationally, structurally speaking, it's a much more different surface that you work with. And therefore, it kind of makes sense that you want to go super tall, for example. But I kind of then want to think, are super talls the way we should be looking at things? Or should we, like you said rightly, density, with these sort of low to mid-rise buildings? I kind of constantly, I see the need for it, but then I don't see a need for it as well. And I'm constantly torn between these two. Where do you stand on it?
No, this is a debate that's going on globally now, not just in the Middle East and Asia, or not just for Dubai. I think many architects in many of the forums are questioning the need for super tall buildings, right? And in fact, China, they've passed a recent law that buildings cannot be above a certain height, and they want to actually change their development model. My personal opinion is that tall versus short is a false choice. That's not actually the real discussion, in my opinion. I think the discussion is more about design, how it's designed, what is the balance between density and open space. So for instance, if we go back 100 years, right? So roughly. So after the World Wars, Corbusier's paradigmatic utopian model was towers, which are tall, but in those days it wasn't maybe 30 stories. That was considered super tall then. But towers in a garden, in a park-like setting. And his model for density was you remove all the density and you make a park and you clump all the density into a single point and it becomes a tower, right? And it was tried and it was not that successful because the green spaces around it were no longer green and they became unsafe. And so then the model for density was clustering towers. So you create a cluster of towers and they can be at different heights and so on. And then the urban spaces hopefully are more meaningful and thoughtfully designed. And there are many examples of that. Dubai has some really successful clusters of density, which should have towers of different heights. They should not all be the same height. And they should be designed for privacy and shadow and all the wind and open space patterns between towers. Vancouver is an amazing example. If you've been to Vancouver, it's a beautiful city and it has some really tall buildings, but it also has some medium and low buildings.
Right.
So I think it's not one or the other. It's how it's all put together that really matters, in my opinion.
Makes sense. I mean, it is, if I were to, give it a bit more thought, I would agree that, yes, it is more about the actual density to open space ratio, which makes sense. Absolutely. I kind of then want to get your opinion on master planning. Again, it's just one of those things where one of my pet peeves is that master planning generally is a very long drawn out process. And it's still in this region relatively quicker as compared to, for example, if you were to look at the UK, where there's legislation and there's, bills that have to go, along with your design and so on and so forth. One of the issues that I've seen that happens with Dubai is that, as we briefly mentioned earlier, the population being so transient, something like a master plan really requires someone to see it through from sort of what it was originally kind of envisioned for to, actually executing it at some point. And I'm just wondering what your opinion is on how do we safeguard that initial vision, especially from the design aspect? Because I know from an engineering point of view, of course, it can obviously, evolve, but that design sort of, especially that initial vision, it can very easily be diluted, over the years, so to speak. So how do you think we can safeguard that?
No, it's a great question. Look, master planning is also a fine science in many ways, because the master plan that is studied, developed, detailed, and agreed on day one actually needs to evolve over the next several decades when it's actually being filled in. Because yes, many of the initial ideas are probably great, but many of them may have to be reconsidered because of the realities of urbanism or change. So I think master plans have to have an aspect of stasis, which is that's the vision, but they also have to have flexibility for change within them. A lot like when we are growing up, right? I mean, when I was 18 years old, I had certain views on things. And then as you get older, your views change and then you change with them.
Correct.
So I think the richest master plans and the richest plans or the richest urban, centers are ones which have dynamic. They even have contradiction in them. So complexity, contradiction, growth, evolution, that's actually part and parcel of what makes cities really exciting. They can't be too dry and too formulaic. They need to have that eccentricity in it.
True.
At the same time, I would say that if a master plan said that there's going to be a public park and it made a lot of sense, it would be a shame if the public park was converted to apartment buildings, right?
True.
Because the planning guidelines had that park, right? And I think that's important. If the FAR or the density was mandated at a certain value, the infrastructure was designed for that. And let's say for whatever reason, the density goes much higher than the infra can support, I think that's a disaster for the master plan. So these are some of the issues that government and planning authorities have to keep a very close eye on. That they are true to the plan.
True.
True to the limits of the plan.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is recently kind of come back on my radar, so to speak, because, as again we spoke off air briefly, our neighbors next door are literally building mega cities, so to speak. And we're, I think, probably for the first time really seeing master plans being implemented at potentially the fastest possible pace, I would think, in human history, even for that matter. Just the amount of resource that's there and the amount of sheer determination, I would say, to get some of those projects up. I mean, needless to say, from a design point of view, a lot of them have faced admiration, criticism, and, regardless of where you fall with those developments, so to speak, I think what's key to really look at is the variations of projects that are now coming. Personally, I can't really say, one is very similar to the other, especially at a master planning level. Obviously, I know that, you and Norr are involved with, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and so on. What are your thoughts on that market, considering at the pace that they're going and the kind of developments that they're doing, and obviously the vision of MBS and all of that? Where do you think they're going to be in the next 3 to 5 years?
Look, I know that Saudi Arabia is getting a lot of press because of the velocity and quantum of change that's happening in that society, right? And I think, personally, any country that is moving with positive energy for positive change, and the change is not just in architecture or in the cities, the change is in the laws of the country.
Even the culture, I would say, to some extent.
Yeah. Look at the demographics. Saudi Arabia, as with many of the countries here in the Gulf region, the demographics are that it is a predominantly young population, under 25 years of age, right? And what do people want? People want productive lives. People want jobs. They want to embrace technology. They want to embrace change, but change for the better. And what is the role of a leader in any country or any organization? I'm a leader in a small organization, 120 people. What's my responsibility? My responsibility is to give my designers, architects, and engineers opportunities for growth. Right? They get to work on great projects. They grow their careers. They experience things. They learn more. Right? So stasis is not really an option. I think change, considered thoughtful change, is the way forward. Now, what we are seeing in Saudi Arabia is a complex situation, in my opinion. There are some fantastic projects which are in remote locations, and these projects are actually getting a lot of attention in the press. And some of them are very exciting projects. But that's not the whole story. What's happening in Saudi Arabia, in my opinion, is that the existing urban centers are also going through a very exciting transformation. So whether it's Al Khobar, Jeddah, Riyadh, Mecca, you're going to see these cities which have existing populations which are also growing, right? These are cities that are growing.
True.
The question is, how do you retrofit? How do you insert into an existing urban fabric better models for connectivity and density and open public space and landscape and sustainability? So we're getting very involved in the urban centers because of our group's capabilities. We are designers of buildings in urban contexts. That's our strength.
Right.
So we are seeing a lot of opportunity there.
Okay.
And it's not just going vertical. So some of our projects are horizontal, extremely horizontal, like 1 kilometer stretch.
Wow.
In Riyadh, multiple buildings, nothing more than 6-7 stories, right?
Wow.
And then the question is, how do you weave and how do you create a new urban fabric in that context? And what's the ethos? Is it about connectivity, health, lifestyle, landscape?
Understood.
So I think it's very exciting. I really do. And
Right.
I would say one more thing. I don't think Saudi Arabia is the only country that's doing this. I think many countries all over the world, and certainly Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Qatar and even Kuwait, I think we are in a period of cultural change. And a lot of it has to do with, again, social media and so on, where our societies are transforming. Our behavior is changing. People's needs are changing. So then as people's requirements and thinking is changing, the leaders and the infrastructure of the country has to also change so that those people and their changed needs are responded to.
Right.
I've been going to Saudi Arabia for 15 years, and we've got a number of projects there. Some are built and occupied, some are in design or construction. About 12 years ago, I was working in Al Khobar with a very enlightened client, and who's now a great friend, Bassam Budai. And we were designing a vertical residential, multifamily, but towers and so on. And the question was, do these apartments have a majlis in them? Do they have many of the things that we were told that Saudi families wanted? So what the decision was made, let's have a meeting with the real users. Let's show them layouts, show them different, and see what do they say. And it was super exciting.
Right.
So he booked a banquet hall, and I went up to Al Khobar, and they invited a spectrum of people.
Yeah, a good cross section.
Good cross section, but probably the strata that they were targeting, middle income, upper middle income strata. And we showed them different apartment types in this case, some with majlis and some more contemporary. And it was split. About half of the people felt it's not worth it to have a majlis and to pay for it because it is hardly ever used. It's an empty room in the apartment. And the thinking was, if you give us some larger meeting rooms, multi-function rooms within the building, which we can then just rent for the event, I don't want such a big apartment with a room lying empty all day, right? And then there was another segment that said they wanted it, but were they willing to pay for it? Because everything costs money, right?
True.
So I came away realizing that society is changing. Society is changing. The way people are thinking is changing. People are now more amenable to vertical living than they were a generation ago, right? And so we need to recognize that, but we need to still customize the design to the current cultural requirements. For instance, there might be some specific requirements on privacy, which you might see in certain societies and not in other societies. Design for it, right?
Yeah. Makes sense.
But I do see change. I see tremendous change in society in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And we should harness it. We should not shy away from it.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. But again, it kind of all comes down to, I mean, in that particular case, that client, in my opinion, took a very educated approach towards, problem solving, so to speak, actually having data, before really executing and things like that. Which in all honesty, I wish a lot of clients and, developers, I suppose that they would do as well. Just bringing things a bit more closer to home, probably, looking at the buy. Obviously, you work with a lot of developers here who are looking to have various types of, projects and things like that. I'm assuming that those briefs no longer look the same like they did maybe 5 years back even. What do you think developers are after now? What is a priority for them? I mean, needless to say, efficiencies, sellable apartments, etc., finding a good operator, obviously those are priorities. But on a much more larger macro scale, what is motivating them?
The Dubai market in particular?
Yes.
Dubai? This market has matured. It's I moved to Dubai in 1996, and it's a completely different place today, right? 28 years later. And I believe it's going to keep changing. If I look 28 years ahead, I'll be 88.
Not a day over 21, though, I must say. Not a day.
I'm 60 today. So it will change. And it has changed. Where are we today? in the different market sectors, which is that we are in, we design multifamily residential, which is towers, apartment towers. We design 4-star, 5-star hotels. We've done quite a few in Dubai and elsewhere. And we also design office buildings, whether they are towers or whether they are office parks. So we've done all of those in Dubai and the region. I think you're talking more about the residential market, is my guess. You're focused on the residential sales market.
Yeah.
Okay, so this market is also maturing, in my opinion. And as in any city, there are different tiers from the here in Dubai, I would say from the lower middle income, upper middle, luxury, then super luxury, right? It all exists. And there are developers who tend to focus on a particular strata because they're more comfortable and they've got a financial model that works in that strata. We've seen, so 20 years ago, when I was designing towers in Dubai Marina, 20 years ago, unit apartment sizes were quite large by today's standards. So we've seen over time, apartments have gotten tighter in their designs, but they've also gotten smarter. The kitchens are really well designed. Kitchens are mostly open kitchens now, right? And whereas in 20 years ago, no, you can't have an open kitchen because of the smell and so on. There were regulations that kitchens had to have exterior windows. Today, no, we use mechanical systems to deal with that. People's behavior has changed. People are willing to go for smaller units because they're used to living a more compact life, right? So I think there's something for everyone in the market. Our work tends to be at the higher strata in the market, where we tend to get invited to design buildings which are at the upper end.
Right.
So, but even those buildings, units are getting tighter, more efficient, but then the finishes are better. So the unit might be smaller, but then it has marble countertops, rather than a big unit that doesn't have marble counter. So I think that's what's happening in the market. And design matters more and more. Customers really want things to be designed well. Elegant design should be functional and efficient, well thought through. I think that's really good news.
Yeah.
Personally.
As a designer myself, I think we can all say we want more of that.
Less is more also. The thing is, everything doesn't have to be luxury. I actually don't agree in that. I think elegant design done well can be done with basic materials. You don't have to put marble on everything. You don't have to put veneer on everything. You can have polished concrete floors or ceramic tile floors. It's actually how you put it together that matters. I would say craftsmanship matters a lot too. How good is the contractor and how good is the architect and engineer and the developer in fighting for quality of construction?
Yeah.
That matters a lot, in my opinion.
No, I agree 100% because I keep a lot of our audience who are, fresh graduates to sort of mid-level and even, sort of veterans in the industry, so to speak. I think whenever I'm sort of asked by especially younger designers on, what should I really focus on? What should I really, obviously I'm, learning to become a good designer, so to speak, but what else? And I keep telling them it's always about knowing how to put a building together, and this has been a learning for me over the last, couple of years where something like a termination joint, I suppose, is not the most glamorous thing that people would find interesting. I must confess, neither did I for a long time. But now that I know how materials sort of come together, how they terminate together, how they fix with each other, and something as simple as you can design a very, very good, let's say, concealed detail, right? But it is so tight that in reality, a contractor can't really execute that because there just physically isn't space for your fingers to get around,
Sure.
Something as simple as that, which I think a lot of designers, I think, are now sort of getting smart to. And I think that's absolutely right. I think, really, the finishes are really, really getting better.
Yeah. And I think you've raised a good point, which is there is a gap between the designer who's designing in a studio, right, late at night, headphones on, sketching away,
right,
and the the contractor and the builder who's going to build it. And that gap is not healthy for our profession. I think more and more we need to make sure that our architects and engineers get onto construction sites. We get to do supervision. We get to do what's called construction supervision on our jobs. And I think it's super critical that you do that. Don't just draw and then hand it over to someone. Follow it through. And the design team that worked on it should get out onto the site, be involved. Some of our people circulate onto the site with the project and come back 3 years later into the studio, right?
Awesome.
And so guess what happens? The designer who worked on a project went to a construction site, did the shop drawing review, saw the contractor build it, saw the problems, comes back to the design studio, gets onto another job and might follow that job through, right? And we need to do even more of that. It depends on the designer's interest. Now imagine the wealth of experience and knowledge that comes through this cycle, right? And then, of course, our directors on construction, who are all really great architects and engineers, they hold seminars and come to our office, and our people go to sites. So it's very important that the craft and constructability ties into the design, which is lines on paper or a Revit model or now AI stuff that's happening. That's great. But we can't let the gap get even bigger. We need to compress the gap, in my opinion.
Understood. And I genuinely feel that is the way forward. I think that will really solve a lot of our problems as an ecosystem, generally speaking.
I mean, if you look at, say, Japan, right? So the way buildings are built in Japan, the architects produce documents which could be tendered and awarded, but very quickly it starts on a site and the architect team is on site producing drawings in collaboration with the contractor. And it's a totally different way of designing and building, which is very much about the craft of building. And the contractors also on some of these projects, they take so much pride in their work. They work with the architects and the engineers to get the right detail. They will be fighting for the right detail, not fighting against it, right?
Wow.
Now that highly collaborative, you talked about Venn diagram earlier. That's a very collaborative, overlapping Venn diagram. That doesn't exist in most of the world. And most of the world is a designer is hired by a developer or an owner, designs, documents are produced, they're tendered, a contractor is selected. Then the architect engineer acts more like a policeman to make sure that the contractor delivers on his promise of the documents, right?
Right.
In the West, more and more, you have what's called design build. The architect engineers are hired by the contractor to design. And that has some particular challenges, in my opinion.
Right.
So there are different models out there, but I would say for a young designer, which was your question, what does a young designer aspire to, or how can we help a young designer, him or her, progress? I think it's important not to pigeonhole them into super specialization. They need to have a broad spectrum of experience. They need to get out on sites. They need to do some conceptual work. They need to do some detailed work. They need to work closely. Architects need to work closely with their engineering peers, and engineers need to work closely with their architect peers, right? So we don't want the silos. Silos, I think, is a big challenge in our industry.
Agreed. I must say, I am insanely inspired. I think anyone listening to this conversation will agree completely as well. As much as I would love for the conversation to continue, we do have to sort of wind down the episode, unfortunately. So I like to, at this juncture in the episode, look forward. And I think it is most interesting to ask you this question, which is, what's next for Yahya? I mean, there is undoubtedly a legacy with Norr, no question. Undeniable portfolio, undeniable talent, clearly. But what's next? What's next that you want to sort of achieve, conquer, learn, etc.?
Look, you just said learn. So for me, I am a non-stop student.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if I wasn't a practicing architect, I would have been teaching in a university. That was actually what I thought I'd do. And then I felt, no, I want to actually get out and see things get built. So as much as I want to teach and motivate people to grow, I also push myself to be a continuous learner.
Got it.
And I'm just going to keep going. I mean, I think it's very clear that we are at an inflection point in our industry. And in many industries, we are at an inflection point because of what technology is starting to do. Right? And that's the hot topic these days, right? We need to find ways to embrace that, conquer the fear and celebrate the excitement of how technology is going. Because I truly believe the change is going to be radical. And we all have to be young, excited, and ready for change.
Got it.
And youth has nothing to do with age. It has to do with how you think, what books you read, what interests you have. I'm very young. I'm about 18 right now.
I don't deny it one bit.
and that's really, and I tell all my guys, everyone, men and women, everyone who's working with us, stay young, stay fresh, keep learning. And part of my responsibility is, how can I create an environment of continuous learning and growth?
Right.
And for me, that's very exciting. That's what gets me out of bed at 5 a.m. I love projects. Thankfully, we have a lot of exciting projects on our tables right now. My most exciting project is the company. It's the studio. It's the people. It's our people on the construction sites. It's our people. And it sounds political and it sounds like it could sound fake, but trust me, it's true. Somebody asked Elon Musk, what was the hardest part about making the electric car, Tesla? And he said it wasn't the car, it was designing the factory that makes the car.
Yeah.
So the biggest design challenge I have is designing the group that's going to produce great work and constantly evolving it, changing it, pushing boundaries. And if we have the right people and they collaborate, the projects will come and go and the work will come out interesting. And the work has to evolve. Our work is evolving and changing.
Yeah.
So I think there's great times ahead for everyone, not just for me, for everyone.
Right.
All the people who can embrace that excitement.
Yeah. Again, I must say, literal goosebumps. I'm like, yes, the future is bright. Let's do it.
It is bright. I mean, there is negativity in social media. I see it, right? And people feel, mental health issues, which are real, have to be addressed. But I would say to everyone, don't forget how lucky and fortunate you are. Don't do that. That would be a travesty to think that in your life, you haven't had opportunities that are beyond your imagination. And then the next generation will also have that. It all depends on your attitude. You need to go to the future.
Yeah.
Don't wait for the future to come to you.
Understood. Well, this episode has been one for the books. I'm not going to lie. As kind of a closing tradition on the episode, we have an aForm tradition, so to speak, which is we have a question that's been asked by one of our previous guests, not knowing who the future guest is. And the future guest does not know who the past guest is. So
fantastic. Yeah.
Some of these are, just for fun, and some of them can become quite deep and philosophical, so to speak.
Wow. Okay.
So we have a question for you today, and you can choose not to answer it either. I mean, that's absolutely fine.
Sure.
So the question that we have for you today is clearly from another architect. So if you could redesign a iconic architectural building, which would it be? Would you? And why would you?
Wow, that's interesting.
So it was, which would it be? Why would it be? Yeah.
Wow, got to think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, the word iconic means that it's a building that's somehow considered in our psyche as unique and different.
Right.
And
So, I mean, off the top of my head, I would think kind of like the Barcelona Pavilion and, things along that nature, probably. But yeah, I mean, sorry.
probably what I would say, which might sound like a cop-out, I would say that if a building is truly iconic, which means it's had an influence on our opinion about architecture and design, and it could be positive or negative, but it's had an influence on us. So let's say the Seagram building in New York, right? Today, I still believe it's an iconic building by Mies, right? And I've seen the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies. Fantastic, the reconstructed version in Barcelona. I personally feel that every artifact of its time is a representation of the thinking of that time, of where we were in our own exploration of, in this case, architecture, but it could be any discipline, right?
True.
And I would say just leave it as it is, because it represents the thinking and of that time, and we can then critique it. Of course we can, and we all have a right to critique and to learn and then to do better, and then we will produce icons which somebody else has a right to critique because they represent the best thinking of that time,
right,
or the value system of that time. So I would say don't redesign an iconic building. Leave it, because it represents the moment in time, right? But also don't worship it. Because our role is not to live in the past. We stand on shoulders of giants. We learn from previous generations, but we always should believe we can do better while we respect them, right? So I see icons, even people as icons, right? So there are people in the past who I consider icons, right?
Yeah.
Would I want to redesign them? No. And they may be flawed icons, right? But they have represented a moment in humanity, those leaders, or could be someone who's not a leader, who's done something really phenomenal in his or her life. That's it. Cherish it. Read about them, right? Learn from what they did. Try and aspire to a similar level of contribution. Maybe you can be an icon in your life, right?
True.
You know, they say that extraordinary people are actually ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. And then we call them extraordinary people. So I believe all of us have a chance to be extraordinary, to be iconic, for the better, right?
I agree completely. At the risk of sounding a bit biased and not sort of, tapping myself on my own shoulder, so to speak, but I think this episode has been quite extraordinary. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie.
Too generous, yeah.
I think there's a lot of food for thought in this episode, which I'm hoping that all the architects and engineers, if you're listening as well, if this episode does anything, I hope it makes you sort of at least question things around you, and probably have you look at your projects, your portfolio, your career, your life in general a bit differently. And I am, on behalf of our team, obviously very thankful for you giving us your time. I keep shouting it from the rooftops that this show is only possible because of people like yourself donating your time. And I know firsthand how valuable that can be. So on behalf of the show, thank you very much for giving us your time and for being part of this episode.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you so much. And for the rest of you guys, we will catch you guys next week.
Fellow aFormer, thank you so much for your time. If this episode added any value to you, please share it with anyone who may benefit. If you want to carry on the discussion, please get in touch with us over socials. We are at aForm Show on the gram and hello@aform.studio on email. That is at aForm Show on the gram and hello@aform.studio on email. Until next time, stay inspired.